Brenda Pollack, who is the South East Regional Campaigner for Friends of the Earth. And she's worked for Friends of the Earth for now over 20 years and currently, quite obviously, focusing mainly on fracking. Brenda.
Hello. Yes, as it happens, I live in Brighton as well, so it's quite good to be invited to something so close to my home. Welcome, everybody. Charles has said a couple of the things that I was going to say, so if I repeat them, it'll help you remember them. So, obviously, I can't cover everything about why Friends of the Earth is working on this issue, but what I want to do is just highlight a few key questions and give our version of the answers to them. And like Charles, I'll be happy to take questions from the knowledge that I've been on a steep learning curve over the last year and a half since I've been working on this issue. So I was first approached to work on fracking by two colleagues of mine. One is the person that does the same job as me in the northwest region, which covers Lancashire. Her name's Helen, and she's a northwest worker. I'm the southeast worker. And she had been helping 2 or 3 different groups of residents up in the northwest who had had problems with this company called Quadrilla that most of us had never heard of until there were some earth tremors that were reported in the papers back in 2011, I think it was. So Helen had been working for quite some time, but none of the rest of us in Friends of the Earth had been really involved in it. But our energy campaigner had written a briefing about shale gas exploration and was starting to look into it. And he said to me, well, you do realise that the southeast is going to have it coming your way because of the Weald Basin that Charles mentioned. The geology of the area means that it's the second possible biggest area of reserves of shale gas or oil in the UK. And they'll be coming your way. So I was quite sceptical because I thought, well, I've not heard of fracking. I've worked at Friends of the Earth. I'm quite a keen environmentalist. And if it was that bad, surely, I would have known about it. And are these people in Lancashire worrying over small earth tremors? And, can't be that bad, can it? Well, you scratch the surface and you start reading about it and you look at reference peer-reviewed studies and you start to see that in other countries there's plenty of evidence showing that it's not just risky, but it is actually affecting the environment and people's health. I've been, as I say, on this steep learning curve, and the more every week more papers are coming out. This week somebody sent me a copy of a small paper from The Lancet. The British Medical Journal has written about it, questioning government-funded studies and other documents that are out there. And one of the problems we have in Friends of the Earth is we've got evidence. We've got a full-scale briefing with about 50 reference papers in here about problems around the world, which is available online on our website. There's a couple of printed copies at our table at the back. And we are saying this, but we, as Friends of the Earth, can't say it alone, and people will say, well, you would say that anyway because you're from Friends of the Earth. So some of the things in my talk are quoting other people that are saying the same sorts of things as us. First of all, as I said, I started working on it a couple of years ago and started making contacts with people in Balcombe and other places where we knew there were site applications. And just to be aware, when we look at the evidence, we use fracking as a shorthand because fracking is a part of the process of unconventional gas or oil extraction. And that is one of the things the industry does, is create a lot of, a word that I love, obfuscation, but it's difficult to say, because they will say, oh, well, there's no evidence actually in the US of fracking affecting water resources. But well, often what they mean, and what if you dig deeper, is it might not be that the evidence, is clear, has been found scientifically to relate to the fracking, but there's all sorts of damage that can be done by other parts of the process, not just the hydraulic fracturing, although that is a key part of it. And so we're talking about huge numbers of increases in HGVs and more accidents and road traffic incidents, air quality problems from flaring of the gas. It's not just about the fracking part of the process, it's the whole unconventional oil and gas process, which is a bit of a mouthful, so everyone often uses the shorthand of fracking. One of the things that I wanted to talk about is really some key questions about whether it's safe, do we need it, and what can you do if you're interested in this to find out more or to help those of us who are campaigning against it. So first of all, on is it safe? I think one thing that the first time I very briefly spoke to a government minister on this. I was at an event in Bexhill a year and a half ago that Greg Barker, one of the energy ministers, was at, who's quite a green-ish or turquoise end of the Tories. I said to him, have you heard about fracking? Because, we're really worried about this. I've started to do some research and it's really bad. And he said, well, that's because in the US, the regulatory system over there is, not the same as ours. We've got, more of a gold standard system. But if you talk to people in places like Australia, we hosted an expert from Australia about a year ago who came to speak in Brighton. I don't know if any of you were here. She's a chemist, an expert in Australia who's fighting against what's called coal seam gas exploration over there, which is the same as a process here that's known as coal bed methane, which is extracting methane from old coal beds, which is also quite damaging, or very damaging. And she said, well, we think we do have a great regulatory system and we're seeing all sorts of problems, so don't kid yourselves, it's about that. And we, since the history has been with Quadrilla, that there's been one example after another, who was the first company to have fracked in the UK, of them managing to flout or sidestep the regulatory system. One example would be in the north west, they were avoiding doing what's called an environmental impact assessment process by making sure that any land that they were putting in applications for were 0.9 hectares instead of one, because that's the threshold of when the environmental impact process needs to come in. So, that's just one example of a number of issues and problems that are with our regulatory system. And as I said, I would like to quote other people. So, let me just find the quote. I lost it. My writing's terrible. Where's this quote? Oh, yeah, so I've said about the earth tremors. So a quote from my colleague who's done the research for our briefing said, and basically our position really as Friends of the Earth is that tougher regulation can make fracking safer, but it can't make it safe. And the United Nations Environment Programme did a study of globally fracking processes and basically said exactly the same thing. They said fracking may result in unavoidable environmental impacts even if the gas is extracted properly. So even if you haven't got a sort of cowboy company and a company that does take it seriously in terms of safety and the way they do the process, you still can't ensure that there is zero risk. So the second point I was asking question was, do we need it? Now, many supporters, and this is something Charles was saying, claim, and this is including our Prime Minister and other government ministers, that energy bill prices will be plummeting if we do extract this gas or oil. They cite the US example. But others, many others, not just us, including Ed Davey, Lord Stern, the economist, and even the head of Quadrilla, as Charles said, Lord Brown, who's also an advisor to the government, has said it's not going to have, he said, the UK shale gas production is not going to have a material impact. And I could quote lots of other people like Deutsche Bank and other financial consultants as well across Europe. And that's not just the UK, that's across Europe, they're saying it, because of the markets being different, the size of the areas being different, and possibly the geology making it more expensive as well. So on the issue of coal, there's people in the gas industry who love to make sure they mention the word natural gas because it sounds nicer, doesn't it, than just gas. Will say that, surely you as Greens should be supporting this dash for gas because it is cleaner than coal, as Charles was arguing earlier. But if you look at the statistics, the US, when they started producing more shale gas, they didn't stop producing coal, they just exported it, mostly to Europe. And then that doesn't help us with our climate change emissions because it's still being emitted, the greenhouse gases, but somewhere else. So obviously the displacement issue of coal has to be taken into account when you're looking at how green these different fossil fuels are. And also, as Charles has said, methane is, it's actually, the latest study has shown it's 34 times stronger at trapping heat than CO2. And the figure in our briefing is 25 times stronger, because until about a year ago, that's what the IPCC was saying, the methane was 25 times more stronger, but recent research is showing that it's actually more potent. So this is the main gas that they're trying to extract is methane, and this is the thing that's leaking out of pipes, and you know, we can't actually monitor. That's one of the problems with the science, actually, is that people still don't exactly know how much is escaping. But if you take that into consideration, obviously, compared to coal, if you take it over a life cycle of 100 years, it's not going to come out so favourably. And that brings me to a key concern for Friends of the Earth, basically. You know, one of the reasons we started working on this, obviously, is because of local communities coming to us saying, we don't understand how the system works, we need some help with our campaigning, but also on climate change. The International Energy Agency said the increased use of gas could muscle out low-carbon fuels, such as renewables. And obviously our concern is that while the government's bending over backwards for the oil and gas industry, it's actually undermining this investment in clean technologies like wind, like solar, and like wave power. And in fact, the UK, being an island and being where we are, we're the windiest country in Europe, so it just doesn't make sense to follow that. And Friends of the Earth would like to see, by 2030, 75% of our energy being produced from renewables, and that is possible if the political will and the financial frameworks are there, with a government that actually wants to see that delivered. The government, you know, I said they were bending over backwards. Just recently, we know that they've weakened the planning guidance to ensure that local authorities have to assume that we need to follow fossil fuel exploration. And recently, some of you will have heard that the Queen's speech is likely to contain new laws that change trespass laws, so that the oil and gas industry don't have to seek permission or even tell neighbours of the land where they're going to drill. Which, yes, Michael Meach's just saying, that's outrageous. That's what we think too. So my last point is really what can you do if you're concerned about this? And like Charles, you know, and his wife, when they first found about it, they didn't just sit at home thinking, oh, I'll twiddle my thumbs, what shall we do? They went out and talked to other villagers and started being active. Obviously, if you haven't got it on your doorstep, you might not be motivated quite so much. But we have plenty of information, background briefings, and help on what you can do, some of which are at our stall at the back. The other thing I would say is make sure you vote next Thursday, and also making the general election campaign, anything that you're doing around that, making energy issues really front of mind, because the one thing I wanted to leave you with is that I do think that the Labour Party's position on fracking and energy isn't strong enough, and it could be strengthened with more activism from the grassroots helping to enable that to happen. And even if you're not involved in politics, you are allowed to write to and go and meet your MP or your local councillor, because many people out there are still not sure and think people are making a fuss about nothing. And if you've got the ammunition that we can provide, or Balkan villagers can provide, please join us, and join one of the nearest frack-free groups, or join Friends of the Earth, or whatever floats your boat, and become a part of this movement that is growing. If you want more resources from our website, if there aren't enough of the briefings at the back, if you go to www.foe.co.uk/fracking, all our information, or some of our information, is there. Okay, thank you.
Well, thanks very much indeed, Brenda, for that very clear presentation, totally without obfuscation.